As an example, just last month in October, ByteDance, there's a lot of articles about this. They had a internal ML intern that compromised, that poisoned a particular model that made it obsolete, that put it at risk, that potentially cost millions and millions of dollars in training. So again, they moved fast. They were building models, but they didn't have the right safeguards in place that could potentially cost a company time, but also millions of dollars worth of cost.
And welcome back to another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, and this week we have with us Ian Swanson from Protect AI. How are you, Ian?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and with all the audience of the 100-Year Podcast.
Yeah, I just want to assure everyone who might be watching instead of listening, he is not an avatar. This is not AI I'm speaking to. It's just his setting is just perfect. He just, he looks almost too good.
But you know what?
Yeah.
You did say something important there, and that is there's going to be a lot more disclaimers about this is not AI. This is a real person. So this is going to be an interesting kind of new future for us as it relates to interviews and phishing and all sorts of security risks, which I'm sure we're going to get into.
Well, actually, let me break format. And actually, since you bring that up, have you had any opportunity to play with this Google Notebook LM?
Yeah, I mean, it's like unbelievable all the opportunities and all the different tools out there and what they're able to generate. Like it is just the pace of innovation in this entire space of AI and all these tools is fascinating, but also exciting.
Yeah, I bring it up, I guess, because we're talking about, kind of, this interview is indeed with a human. I actually tried it. So I heard about it and I saw like a demo and I was like, it's okay. And
Yeah.
then I actually fed it some data sources, like a short story, a research paper, and then I, enabled the podcast function, and it's really good. The back and forth between the male and female virtual podcasters, it's very convincing. They add all of the little ad libs and the hem haws, and there are even kind of like little interruptions to kind of like give it kind of more of an organic feel. But when I listen to podcasts, I generally listen for a combination of, I would say, the personality and background of the human podcaster as well as the topic. And so I think in that respect, until you, I think, begin to generate entire backstories, which I imagine is possible at some point, but entire backstories and give them more of a rich, I guess, existence. You're kind of it's basically kind of just a really great when you take a web page and you ask it to read you the web page, it's like that on steroids. But it's great. I can see, like, if you're like in college researching, or if you're in a research lab and you just need something to kind of add to your suite of tools to kind of help you maybe passively learn something while you're directly studying the books and text and everything. I mean, are you I didn't ask, do you have any kids? Are you watching like how this is impacting our kids?
Yes. So I do have kids. I have two girls, 14 and 12. And my 12-year-old, it was pretty funny. Just the other day, she sent me a request to be able to access a new website because it was being denied. And it was a AI website. Now, it was blessed by her teacher, and it was a learning assistant. But, it was just so shocking to think back to like when I was in school, and like the most advanced thing that we had right then was like the calculator, like the TI-85, or something like that, and just seeing the scope and the ability to be able to expand knowledge leveraging AI. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also some risk, on that side. And to your point of this podcast and this back and forth with this AI that was created, I think, Ben Affleck, as he was talking about AI, in Hollywood, even talked about, hey, we might be able to write a play, but is it really Shakespeare at that point? And I think what you were getting to is, it's just amazing how we're able to, just see the differences of AI today than just a couple of years ago. But it's not quite there yet, maybe with the richness, that you're looking for in the podcast example. But the path is definitely there, and that's what makes this whole space exciting, but perhaps also challenging at the same time.
Absolutely. I actually want to come back to that Ben Affleck thing maybe a little bit later, but first
Yeah.
let's get into you.
Yeah.
Where are you from? Like let's pull back the curtain before Protect AI. I know a little bit about you. I remember your name from datascience.com.
Yep.
And I think that was acquired by Oracle, but just where'd you come from? What's the background here?
Yep. So I grew up east of Los Angeles, and I had two companies that were based in LA, two startups. But I wasn't always, in tech. Didn't always think I wanted to have a startup. I was actually working at a big telecom, and I would get this magazine called Business 2.0. And this
Oh,
magazine is not around anymore, but think like an ink, on that.
no, I remember Business 2.0. Yeah,
It
yeah,
was an
yeah.
awesome magazine, but on
I
the
loved it.
cover were two guys, Chris and Tom, and they just sold MySpace. And I remember, going back home to my then girlfriend, but now wife, and I was like, man, I want to build something like these guys. And I quit, my telecom job that I was doing really well in, and I found a startup. I worked there for a year, and I was very upfront with the CEO, and that is, I want to build, I want to invent. And so I started my first company, Symmetrics, that was a very heavy AI machine learning company in the fintech space that I
What
got
year is
acquired.
this?
That was in 2007. And
Okay.
so we actually had a chief data scientist at Symmetrics in 2007, 2008, before it was really like a big thing. Like one of my friends, DJ Patil, coined the term data scientist when he was at LinkedIn, and that was right around 2007. So this was kind of the earliest days of trying to figure out how do we build structure around AI and machine learning. But I started that company, I sold it to American Express. My second company, as you mentioned, datascience.com, was a platform to build, train, deploy machine learning at scale, really big customers. We sold that to Oracle, as you mentioned. And then I moved from Los Angeles to the Seattle area, where I was the worldwide AI leader for all of Amazon Web Services, so AWS. And that's where I saw AI at just massive scale. I mean, nearly 100,000 customers using AI in financial services to healthcare, life sciences, but also in the journey that I've had for 17 years, I've seen risks. I've seen risks as it relates to how do we make sure that AI is safe? How do we make sure that it can be trusted? And how do we make sure that it's secure? And that's why I started Protect AI about 2.5 years ago.
And I guess that brings us to the story of, I guess, the origin story of
Yeah.
Protect AI. I often talk about here on the pod, we talk about open source AI and kind of the risks. For me, when at least I would say my view, let's say nearly 24 months ago, was okay. I see all these AI companies starting up, but there's open source, which is kind of where I got my hands first dirty in using AI as as an end user, experimenter. And my thought was, okay, well, you got all of this, you have all these tools, but if open source is always kind of like nibbling at the edges constantly and kind of like maybe just a couple of steps behind, how do you really accrue value?
Mhm.
And over time, I realized that, aside from support, in terms of, bespoke experiences and, helping to, speed and, just various use cases, security is probably one of the biggest, I guess, reasons why you might not touch open source AI tools, software models. What are you guys doing? I think you have something called Guardian that
Yep.
touches that.
Yeah, so a couple things on that point. We're a big fan of open source. I'm a big fan of open source. Here at Protect AI, we actually have 6 open source projects, that are live that people can test and use. And one of our partners, Hugging Face, is the leader, if you will, of open source AI and the biggest AI community in the world. Now, to that point, imagine if AI was a birthday cake sitting here right now, but you didn't know how it got here. You didn't know the baker, you didn't know the ingredients or the recipe, would you eat a slice of this cake? Likely not. And that's the state of a lot of AI, is how it was built, who built it. A lot of that is hidden on that side. Now, machine learning models can be serialized. And even as they're serialized, can hide things like malicious code, within it, or backdoors within the neural network of the model. And so, to your point, you mentioned a product that we have. We have one product called Guardian. We have 4 other products, and Guardian scans models for these hidden risks, on that. And we've deployed it with Hugging Face, an unbelievable partner for us, where now every single model on Hugging Face, over 1 million models, you can get a disclaimer that says, is this model safe or is this model not safe or perhaps vulnerable to a weakness? With a full explanation of research of what is the potential challenge here, what is an attacker's path, and what's a remediation. So it's critical that we make sure that the open source community of AI is safe, that it can be trusted, and that it can be secured, because it serves as a lot of the essential ingredients for AI that many companies leverage today.
Now, I'll admit I only looked into, I guess, your enterprise use cases.
Mhm.
Are there any tools for an individual person trying
Absolutely.
to deploy? So what is that? What do you have in the way of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where a lot of our open source community and offerings come in. And so on the open source side, we have a open source project called Model Scan that anybody can go and use. And they can scan models, open source models, that they're building to scan for risks. We also have something called Vuln Hunter that is able to take a look at projects with AI and find any vulnerabilities within those projects. But the bottom line is we have 6 open source projects, millions of downloads, hundreds and hundreds of forks where people could get started using that today. And then if they feel like it, then they can start to onboard into our commercial offerings if they're part of a large enterprise.
And you just said Hunter. I know there's something else you guys have called Hunter, which is a
Yeah.
bug bounty program. Hunter without the E, if anyone wants to like
Yeah.
look that up. Can
Yep.
you kind of describe what that is? What is the reward for finding bugs? What has been your success with that program?
Yep. So Hunter, HUNTR.com, as you mentioned, it is our threat research community that we own, that we operate. And it operates as a bug bounty program to find risks, vulnerabilities, security issues in that supply chain, in those ingredients of AI. Our mission has been we want to help our customers, our partners build a safer AI powered world. One way to give back was make the open source community safer. And so this particular threat research community of 16,000 people that comprise of Hunter, they go and they find critical, what are called vulnerabilities in things like NVIDIA Train Inference Server. We've worked with Hugging Face in improving transformers, and Databricks and things like MLflow. These are projects that are used millions and millions and millions of times, and it forms the critical components of the supply chain that we need to make sure that we lean in, that we help, that we support, and that we make sure that we're always eliminating any risks that we can find. That's how we're doing a little bit of our part to build a safer AI powered world.
Now, is this? Can you differentiate for me if this is different? ML SecOps
Yeah.
and the connection with AI or machine learning and cybersecurity.
Yep. So one thing that we found getting into this space of AI security was first, none of the existing cybersecurity incumbents, the big vendors, truly understood this space, nor do their solutions really work. And what we saw was an evolution in your typical software development to move from DevOps to include security. It became DevSecOps. And that's where you see these really big security companies like Sneak and others that have something called Shift Left, where they're introducing security in the development process. We thought the same thing needed to be done for machine learning, for AI. So ML ops has been around for a while. This is where ML practitioners are building, training models to power AI applications. We wanted to include security. So ML SecOps. We have a community. It's called mlsecops.com. What that community is about, education, events, learning. It's free. It's not really for us to make money. It's for us to share knowledge and for the communities to come together to understand what is the differences of securing AI versus your typical software.
And what is, I guess, you guys just got I think a $60 million series B
Yep.
injection of funding. So clearly there's belief in your mission. But give me a sense of where you stand in the overall landscape. I mean, you have a bunch of companies, startups building models,
Mhm.
whether it's for, mundane things like, I guess, accounting, legal work, film, video. Um, what, where do you sit in that ecosystem?
Yep. So maybe I can start by telling a story so we can understand the expanse of the space. Um, Last year was all about education of AI security to chief information security officers about what's different, what's new in securing AI. And I remember one of those phone calls I was on with one of the CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers of a top 5 software company. And he gets on the call and he goes, Ian, I'm on this call for education purposes. We don't have much AI deployed yet. Well, their head of AI was on the same call. And their head of AI went off mute on a Zoom call and said, what are you talking about? We have over 7,000 use cases live that are being powered by tens of thousands of machine learning models. And we've been doing that for a decade. So to be super clear, even though we're seeing a step function change in the capabilities of AI and perhaps the deployment of AI, it's been around for decades and companies are using it at massive, massive scale. So then where do we come in? We come in very simply as companies are building, as they are deploying AI, we need to secure it at every single point of the journey. And we do it with vendors that are creating AI that companies are buying and deploying, but also as companies are building their own AI capabilities, we need to be able to secure that as well. And the last thing I would say here is if I'm an enterprise, there should be no AI within the enterprise without truly securing AI. Again, we need to make sure that it's safe and that it can be trusted.
I'm curious, since you are aware of the AI Act in Europe, give me your forecast of like how do you think that will impact development of AI versus how things are happening here?
Yeah. So a lot of the, I would say, undertone of challenge and discussion that's happening at government levels is we don't want to stifle innovation, but we also need to make sure that we're protecting it at the same time. And so that's always a little bit of a give and take, as we think about regulations, on how do we make sure it's safe, but also that we're able to deploy it at scale. So the one thing that I will say right now that I have seen working with companies around the world, Protect AI is global. We have an office in Berlin, Bangalore, and our headquarters here in Seattle, is every company is looking about how we can deploy this faster, how we could deploy this, at scale. But how do we make sure in the beginning that we are doing so in a way that we can audit it, that we have visibility, that we have knowledge of these systems, and that we're building in security throughout. And that's going to help us, I think, continue to be innovative and not slow down our progress. So I do think that there's some give and take here, but I think the regulations are really, really important.
So okay, but that's I'm not looking for you to necessarily set the EU aflame, but
Yeah.
what I mean, I mean, let's just be direct. Do you think that will stifle innovation in Europe? Do you think they are essentially tying one hand behind their back as, the US and I guess China and a couple of countries in Asia rush forward without kind of like the handcuffs that the
Yep.
EU has put on their companies?
So here's why I would say yes. There needs to be more clarity on the EU AI Act, what companies actually need to do to stay compliant. So they pointed out potential issues, with AI, but there needs to be better, guardrails and how do we make sure that we are being compliant? That's not incredibly clear. So in that case, absolutely, I think we're slowing things down because we could have confusion. Now, if I were to speak to the other side of it, I would say companies that are not thinking about safety, thinking about security in the beginning, they're going to deploy. They're going to deploy fast. They're going to move quickly on innovation, but they might have to pull it back as they generate risks within their business. So we've seen some of that. As an example, just last month in October, ByteDance, there's a lot of articles about this. They had a internal ML intern that compromised, that poisoned a particular model that made it obsolete, that put it at risk, that potentially cost millions and millions of dollars of training. So again, they moved fast. They were building models, but they didn't have the right safeguards in place that could potentially cost a company time, but also millions of dollars worth of cost.
That's a huge story. I can't believe I forgot to bring that up. And that person is actually, if you go on GitHub and various, AI communities, he's now become infamous. So yeah, that's I love that you highlighted that. So let's go, I guess, back to the States
Mhm.
in general. I want to get kind of your review or your outlook of some of the not necessarily the most powerful AI companies, but the names that many people know. So I guess I'll mention, of course, OpenAI, Anthropic, I guess Perplexity,
Yep.
and then also, Elon Musk is attempting to become one of the big players, but he's definitely getting the name out there. Grok from XAI, or I guess the offshoot from his Twitter rebrand of X. Who, like, I just mentioned four,
Yep.
kind of, I guess, like really big name recognition AI companies. Like, how do you see them? Like, just give me kind of your lay of the land. Like, what do you think? Who's doing interesting things? Who seems to be moving in the right direction?
Yep. So, of the names that you mentioned, I mean, clearly OpenAI, it'll be really interesting to see what their next version, if you get to like, uh, you know, the next version of GPT, when that comes out, of just how much closer maybe it gets to AGI. I still think we're, ways from there. Anthropic and making the models smaller, but yet super compelling in terms of what they can do. But there's two companies that I think you didn't state that people need to make sure that are always on the radar, and that is NVIDIA. And I would also put Microsoft, in there. I've been incredibly impressed what Satya and team have been able to do as it relates to AI and their workings with OpenAI, but also just as they're thinking about it within their company. What they think about is how can AI go all the way through to all of Microsoft's products, but also be able to govern it, be able to do it in a compliant way, do it in a safe and a secure way. So Microsoft from the big companies is really blazing a path that a lot can emulate. The other company would be NVIDIA, clearly, what they're doing. But it's not just going to be on the infrastructure side. It's going to be really interesting to see what NVIDIA is going to be able to do as they start to round out and build more services, more capabilities, more products that surround their infrastructure offerings. Now, there's two trends in AI that I think are going to be really, really interesting going forward. Number one is going to be innovation as it relates to the compute, the power, the infrastructure side. The amount of cost, the amount of resources it takes to train these models is massive. And so we need to start thinking, more on the infrastructure, but really even on the power side of it. You're seeing, and you're going to be seeing more of these big clouds actually buying power companies. I mean,
Yeah,
think about that. Like a
nuclear.
big like cloud data company buying a nuclear plant, but like that's the state of where we're at. And then the other side is going to be how do we make AI connect into these agents that can carry on tasks. So that last summer when I was booking a trip for my family to go to Switzerland, I would love just to be able to ask ChatGPT, what's the number one agenda, knowing our family, the itinerary that we might want to do, just go book it. Connect into all of our favorite travel destination sites. It has all my information. It has our passport details. Just handle it for me. And we're almost there right now. And that's really where we're going to have this agentic rise, if you will, of AI.
Yeah, I'm hearing that word a lot lately, agentic. One company I neglected to mention was Google and
Yeah.
Gemini, which is incredibly impressive. Again, we started, the pod off mentioning Notebook LM. I think the reason myself and others kind of forget sometimes, that they are indeed such an active player, is that, I don't know, Google has so often in the past bet big on certain projects, and sometimes they kind of just, fade away or maybe get folded into the larger product, and you kind of forget, oh, Google actually, like, instead of breaking it out, it's kind of baked in, and you kind of almost forget that they innovated on a particular lane, or in a particular lane. You mentioned something about, I guess, AGI and OpenAI. We have to mention, or I have to mention, that a ton of their top level people and a number of engineers have left in recent months. And again, this we covered this when it happened. This is not that long after Sam Altman got fired. And
Mhm.
then there was supposedly some sort of staff revolt or campaign to bring him back. And so now it's a bit odd to see. Okay, he comes back, and then now all of a sudden, all of these people who were supposedly, gung ho, behind him have left.
Yep.
So that's odd. Note number one. You don't necessarily have to address that. I just wanted to make a point of that. But what I do want you to address is, Sam Altman is continually in the press, in the media, speaking about AGI, super
Yep.
intelligence, and how it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. I talked to a number of skeptics who simply do not believe. I think we recently had someone from Hugging Face, um, who has been working in AI for some time, and he simply sees it as a number of AI as a number of other AI experts and founders see it. It's a tool, and thinking that it will ever actually reach even I guess a simulacrum of intelligence is kind of, I guess, science fictional. What say you to that? Particularly since Sam Altman seems to be obsessed with this idea.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's somewhat, science fictional, as you put it, on that. However, if we start to look at the horizon of AI, and if anything, just the advancements in the last 2 years, it is a little bit hard to say it's absolutely not going to happen. I mean, we've seen just a step function change, almost like a Moore's law side of just the advancements of AI in just a short period of time. And I was at an event last week with a lot of venture capitalists and people who are leaders of AI. And one of the companies on the stage, one of the companies you mentioned before, stated the hardest part about this particular industry, whether you're an investor, whether you're a builder of a company like Protect AI, or you're building new models, is everything that you see today is going to be perhaps obsolete in 6 to 12 months, and you don't even know what the future is going to look like. So even though I'm a skeptic right now, I still need to understand that maybe I can't see it quite yet, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And just looking at the past, it's just been unbelievable, the state of growth and the state of capability that we have come from as it relates to
Yeah,
AI.
yeah. What I'm seeing is this kind of I think there's this I see kind of like this divide almost between atheism and
Mm.
faith. And let me explain.
Yeah.
The atheists of AI believe this is just a tool. There is no magical, turning point at which this becomes semi or fully sentient and competes with us as the apex predator on the planet. That's the atheist side. And then I guess the religious, faith-based side is, there is, kind of this point where magic will happen and we
Yep.
will need to contend with it. And that makes me think of I don't know, for some reason all of my research about all of this has kind of like led me down the path of like how people see God.
Mm.
And I think there's some, I may be getting this wrong, but I think it's called Pascal's wager. I think it's called. And it's basically this idea of basically if you it's basically betting on being an atheist versus betting on being faith-based. And I think the way it comes out is that it's maybe a better wager to bet on faith, bet
Mm.
on that there might be a God. There are less losses associated with betting on the fact that there might be a God versus betting on the idea that there isn't a God. And to some degree, this is kind of like I guess I'll probably be touching on this in the newsletter. This quick plug, 100 Year Lens. You can check out the newsletter, 100year.substack.com. Um, just this idea that some people, particularly, I guess, Jeffrey Hinton,
Hmm.
who left Google in a big huff over this very issue, who kind of almost have this faith-based, creative thinking approach toward AGI and superintelligence. What is? Are you an atheist or faith-based? Like, I know this is kind of touchy. To be
No.
clear to listeners and viewers, we're not talking religion. Now I'm speaking AI. Are you a believer or a non-believer?
Well, let me first by saying let's separate church and state. And let's talk about what I think we should do no matter what the belief is. And that is uh, whether we have religion that we're going to get to AGI and we have faith in that, or if, to your point, we're an atheist and we're talking about all the things that we don't think it's going to be able to do. We need to have guardrails on both approaches. We need to come from a foundation of knowledge. We need to know how these systems are built. We need to understand the hidden risks that could be within it. So again, regardless of whether you are religious, or an atheist on this topic, I think we can all come together and separate, church and state here to say, let's have the right guardrails, within it. Now, to answer your question directly, um, I think it's starting to become a little bit harder not to have faith, in this space. And the reason why is just, again, the growth. When I was at Amazon, I remember writing a paper internally that was talking about generative AI. And we were starting to work through the use cases and thinking through what it could do and how we might be able to get there. And all I can say is it got there much faster than we really thought it could, and it's just been phenomenal to see that growth, that I think a little bit of all of us need to have a little bit of faith, but build in the right tooling, the right knowledge, so that we can understand what AI can do, perhaps what its limitations are, but most importantly, what its risks could be.
Yeah, and just for anyone listening or watching, just to be clear, we're not saying, or I'm not saying that
I'm
some
not.
of these AI experts. Well, yeah, just to be, I just want to clarify an earlier point. We're not. I'm not saying that uh, some AI experts have actual faith, writ large, that this super intelligence will happen. No, what I'm saying is that these people have the technical background to actually predict and forecast how this will come to pass. And the so-called atheists that I'm referring to are the people who also have technical backgrounds, and from their vantage point, they don't see the pathway forward technically toward super intelligence and I guess a semi-sentient new being on planet Earth. So just to be clear for anyone who might mix that up. Um Man, I had a different question in mind, and I'll get to it, but man, whenever someone brings up academia, that lights me up, because this so much of the research and talent in the AI space is from that world.
Yep.
I'm curious, when you look at, I guess, the Ivy Leagues, and not even, MIT is not Ivy League, but it's kind of, I guess, Ivy League adjacent. When you look at Ivy League, universities and high level universities and the costs associated with those universities versus some of the massive investments going into in some cases very speculative startups, do you think, and now I'm speaking, I guess, as an American, do you think we are on some level failing or not meeting some obligation to our children, in that the
Mm.
cost of high education, I mean, everyone can go to a community college, on the cheap, and get a 2-year degree, and then maybe from that 2-year degree get a scholarship or get some sort of assistance. But student debt is one, I think it's the biggest debt in our country. Most people want to go to a high level university, and particularly if you are in STEM and you're looking to pursue AI, you want to hit the top, and not
Yep.
everyone can get a scholarship. So, I mean, with all of this investment money, flowing to all of these startups, do you think we have a responsibility to kind of like, everyone talks about STEM, and, oh, don't study liberal arts, study STEM. Well, then where's the money,
Yeah. Yeah. That's. I think it's a really interesting thing to figure out, what is working and what's not working, as it relates to education. But I think a critical point here is, how do we make sure that education and these tools, specifically AI, is available to many? And this democratization of AI has made it more accessible. It's still not accessible, I'm sure, for everybody that's out there. But it used to be a thing, call it 10 years ago or more, where you had to be at the top universities to get access to their, in quote, supercomputer to go and build something. But now the cost to compute, the advances we've seen in infrastructure capabilities and in open source in these foundational models, makes it so that we can be a little bit more democratic in our thoughts of, like, how do we give this to the masses and give many more schools the opportunity versus, the few and the handful that you mentioned, previously. So I do think it is our duty, to figure out how can we make sure that we are being fair, that we're being balanced, but that we're giving opportunity to everybody. And I think it's the advances that we're seeing in AI, but all software, which is starting to make the barriers of entry much, much lower and more open for more schools, more academic programs, but most importantly, more people to get access to. As I just said, my daughter goes to a very small school, and in sixth grade, she is now interacting with AI in a way that I would not even fathom 4 or 5 years ago. And I've been in this space for 17 years. So clearly, there's a lot of opportunity to be able to leverage these technologies within our educational system.
This makes me think about, I keep hearing these anecdotes of parents generally parents in the tech space, speaking about their children and how they're learning differently now. And this is actually something I've been doing with various models, where you basically have a conversation with the model.
Yeah.
Well, how do you solve this equation? Well, why is it like that? Okay, I didn't understand how you just solved that. Can you break that down a little, in more simpler terms? Um, well, okay, that's based on that theory. Well, who's the guy who came up with that theory? What country is he from? When did he die? What? And you can just start going down, and it makes learning an adventure. And it's almost like you are in a classroom, and you're able to immediately prioritize yourself, and the rest of the students fade away, and you can dominate the teacher's time, assuming you don't have a hallucinating teacher, a hallucinating model teacher. um will this eventually make the academy, as they call it, the university system, obsolete or near obsolete?
I don't think it's going to make it obsolete, but I do think it's going to expand the opportunity, in terms of how do we interact? What does that classroom environment look like? How do we, learn differently? So I'll give an example to date myself. I grew up in the 80s. I mean, I remember pulling up an Encyclopedia Britannica, getting the volume that would say R or S or T and pulling it out. And if I had to write a report on Russia, turning to Russia on a page and just reading and trying to learn, now someone can ask questions, to your point. They can ask hows and whys, and even just thinking about my daughter's example from this past weekend, she was working on math homework on it and she wanted my help, and I just gave her the answer. She's like, "But Dad, how'd you get to the answer?" And she was literally leveraging AI to learn and to be taught. And so I think what we're going to see is the opportunity for learning increase with this new tool set. It could perhaps come with some risks. I mean, I had Congress ask me last December about, hey, how do we eliminate AI from helping people cheat, on college exams, and stuff. So there's going to be some ethical sides that we got to work out. And you're seeing it as well, even in like media and Hollywood and plagiarism. And, maybe you want to, get into what Ben Affleck was talking about recently. But we have to create, and going back to separate church and state, if you will, and that, religion that we were talking about of atheists versus having faith, is we need to have guardrails. We need to have ethics. We need to have safety, trust, and security in these systems. And that is something that we have to say yes to, and we need to have those systems in place.
um yeah, the more I kind of delve into what's happening in academics with AI, the more I'm seeing professors, even
Mm.
professors who aren't particularly tech forward, they are trying to learn rapidly. Now there are all these disclaimers. You are expected to not use AI, in terms of like term papers and quizzes.
Yep.
So I mean, academia is, they're learning quickly, but it will be an interesting kind of dance to watch unfold over the next few years. So let's go, I guess, to wrap up, let's go back to the Ben Affleck story. So
Yeah.
for those who haven't watched it, I guess we'll try to play something, a big clip of it. But basically, Ben Affleck um, was speaking to CNBC, and he attempted to weigh in on the development of AI and its impacts on Hollywood and just the creative industry.
Is it possible that a Netflix could say, we're going to do our own, James Bond thing out there with a bunch of actors that are completely recreated for this market or that market?
A, that's not possible now. B, will it be possible in the future? Highly unlikely. C, movies will be one of the last things, if everything gets replaced, to be replaced by AI.
I don't know. From my vantage point, I felt like he gave a very 2022 take. And basically,
Mhm.
his take was, well, AI is great and it's doing some very impressive things, but it will mostly be something that takes away jobs from the craft industry, particularly, special effects artists, editors, maybe, some kinds of cameras, that kind of thing. So he's kind of talking about, I guess, the blue collar, slash technical, back end, post production part of the Hollywood production process. And he seemed very convinced that humans will not be replaced anytime soon in Hollywood on screen. Now, the reason I call this a 2022 take is because I remember very clearly in early 22, I want to say February, March 2022, when we started seeing, and AI hadn't become kind of like this mainstream talking point yet. It was still kind of like in the shadows or on the edges. Um, but some people in the artist community, they began to see what was happening. And their biggest talking point, and this was from like, experienced, very high level, technically savvy people who are artists. And their big talking point was, well, it can't do hands. There you go. And when it, as long as it can't do hands, they've got a problem, and we're fine, and there's a long path ahead, and blah 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 blah. And then the next year, hands looking good. you know um I feel the same way about AI and humans. I think there are two approaches that you can take. One is, I guess, video to video, and one is, generative. Generative, being it's completely generated from the AI. Video to video would be a scenario where you would film a film, a movie, or maybe even take an existing movie and then process that through AI to make it look like something incredibly different, wonderful, and interesting. But it was filmed, let's say, somewhere in Nebraska, for $50 over a weekend. But because you are able to like basically, kind of transport all that movement and action and dialogue and interaction into the AI model, now you've got something special. Um, I suspect that Ben Affleck is kind of, again, using a 2022 take. This is an old take.
Yep.
I don't think he understands how rapidly AI video and AI film production is advancing. I mean, are you keeping an eye on this? Do you have any thoughts on how actors and how Hollywood in general is responding to this?
Yeah. I think you could almost go back as we start to look through paradigm shifts, and we're in one right now. I mean, even just the invention, if you will, of the internet, and then the wide mass usage of it, as we saw these companies in the late 90s, early 2000s that were all about like websites and website building companies and just this like rise of it. But if you weren't on the web, you were going to then die. Like you had to leverage it as a tool. You had to, if you were a large organization. The same thing I would say for AI. I think if I was anywhere within Hollywood, um, let's say, on the video side, as you talk about with Ben Affleck, but also the music industry, every single industry is going to be disrupted, like, period. Now, there's different scale of what that disruption might be, but there's also areas of opportunity. So I would be more of the ilk of how do you embrace it and how do you learn and become educated on the value that it can deliver for a particular craft, in this case, maybe acting on that, because it's not going to go away. If anything, it's going to become more intelligent. It's going to become smarter, and it's going to be more capable on it. Now, I would say is AI going to take away jobs? Yes, it's going to eliminate some jobs. But where that's going to elimination is going to be is because individuals are going to be able to do more, better, and faster. And it's going to be those individuals that learn it within their industries that are going to be safer from the disruption that is going to be happening faster and faster as this AI revolution continues to grow in its velocity of capabilities. People are going to have to learn, and they're going to have to adopt it.
Yeah, and one other, I agree with that. And one other thing, I think that Ben Affleck and those who, he had a lot of praise online. Oh, an actor gets it. But I think another thing he's missing is that there will be, this is my forecast that I've been making for, I would say, the last year and a half, that there will be a bifurcation in entertainment where you'll have blockbusters and kind of softer commercial TV series that eventually become largely AI based, whether it's motion capture, or rather video to video or generative. And then you'll have kind of a smaller, I guess, artisanal uh, side of Hollywood where they're still using traditional methods to film. I mean, even in that artisanal space, they'll almost certainly use some AI tools to edit and,
Yeah.
Sweeten sound and that kind of thing. But in terms of actual humans on real sets or on sets, actually, practicing the craft of acting as it has been traditionally practiced, I think that will happen, but it'll be smaller. It'll be more expensive. It'll be more expensive to consume as an end user or as a consumer, and it'll be like I said, kind of artisanal. It'll be kind of like almost like the way theater is right now. Theater hasn't died. Theater still exists. We still love going to the theater, but it is in no way something that you can become as an actor a billionaire from, or even 100 millionaire from, unless maybe you wrote the play or something. So that's kind of like the divide that I see coming. That I think someone like a Ben Affleck, who has produced, written, and directed a number of like really great small films, I think he'll be okay. And maybe he understands this, and maybe that's why he's not bringing it up, because he understands that this is his domain, and that's where he'll have to retreat to. But I think for blockbusters, your Jurassic Parks, your Star Wars, I think it's undeniable that those will be largely either generative AI or video to video.
So here's like a positive on all this. And, I speak a lot about the democratization of AI, and we talked about open source and Hugging Face, and, maybe too much power in a few companies, and making sure, in the academic environment that everybody can use AI. So let's think about that for a second, which is, if we truly democratize AI, make sure it's safe, secure, trusted, all that stuff, and we get AI in the hands of many, is you've now made opportunities for people that maybe would not have opportunities to crack into, in the example we're giving, Hollywood. That now you can have, crafters and people that maybe don't have the backgrounds, the inroads, the connections, where now they can have the capabilities and the tool sets to create very new, novel, perhaps inexpensive, and opportunities for them to break into new markets. And so I think that's going to be a lot of the power of AI versus just, kind of turning an industry on its head in a way. It's going to be, how can we get more and more people involved within this space and drive innovation further to disrupt, to truly digitally transform. And that's going to be a lot of the opportunity of AI in the masses over the course of the next, I think, not just 5 years, but we're already seeing it now. We're going to see it do step function changes over the course of even just the next 2 years.
Man, you've been so great, so I hate to disagree with you, but I have to. I
Please do.
must. I
Please
I
do.
apologize, but I
Let's
must.
do it.
I feel like I saw this. What's happening now in AI in Hollywood? I feel like I saw this story before, which is digital video,
Mm.
shooting on digital and nonlinear editing. Using tools, like whatever, Premiere, Final Cut. I remember very clearly, because I was kind of in my indie filmmaker bag back then. And I remember very clearly all of this discussion of the democratization of film and how much cheaper it would be to produce, and how many more films we would see because of these cheaper methods. And to some degree that happened. There were some standouts, but by and large, the old system simply shifted over to the new tools, and the people without connections, without money, without resources were summarily, marginalized, just like they were with the old system. And so my viewpoint on this is like, okay, sure, we'll see some cool clips on YouTube. Sure, there will be influencers, AI, video. There are AI. We've had many of them on this podcast. There are and will be AI video influencers who stand out and maybe get jobs based on their work. But I mean, in the main, speaking of the entire industry, Hollywood writ large, the TV industry writ large, uh, I just see that cottage industry of connections, um, you know, uh, gatekeeping, moving over to AI. I don't see a democratization coming. And I think the only democratization I see is what we already have in place, which is social media.
Hmm.
Like right now, you can get someone. Actually, you've had several big hits come from TikTok, to a lesser degree, Instagram, from someone who didn't have a record deal. They didn't have a manager. They weren't really famous, but they executed an amazing song or an amazing video. And then next thing you know, they've got a career. That I can see continuing to happen. But I personally, from my vantage point, I just see this as the same way digital video happened. It's just a tool, and the same, channels will be, the same structure. These people don't want to give up power. The
I agree
Hollywood,
with that. Yeah.
you know.
But if we think
So
about the structure, and you've spent some time in this space, the structure of media has changed dramatically, in the last 5-10 years, right? I mean, all of us talk about just how many even streamers that we subscribe to, and even niche ones, at that. So what I hope to welcome is another one of these conversations, 2 years from now, where we can do a look back, and see like, wow, what were all the things that AI was able to change, how we are thinking about technology, how we're thinking about our day-to-day lives, how our kids are using it, how we are using it. It's going to be a tool, I think, that is going to make pervasive change. And we're just scratching the surface of it right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens 1 to 2 years from now. I've been in this space for 2 decades. It's hard for me to even predict.
well, I appreciate. Let's end on that optimistic note. I appreciate you being here. Tell everyone like where they can find what you're doing
Yeah.
as a company and personally, if you want to give out that information on
Yeah.
social.
I think it's just really easy. My company is Protect AI. It's protectai.com. You can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn, and more than happy to chat with any of the listeners. It's a fantastic podcast. We're all fans here at Protect AI, and I'm looking forward to any conversations that follow.
Well, Ian Swanson, I appreciate it. Thank you. And you can check out previous episodes of the 100 Year Podcast at 100year.com and check out our Substack, as we mentioned earlier, which is 100year.substack.com. Please like and subscribe. It matters to us. It's meaningful. We appreciate it. And we will see you next time.